The morning light slipped through the half-closed blinds in our bedroom, painting stripes across Emily's back as she stood by the window scrolling through her phone. I watched her from the bed, the soft glow of the screen reflecting off her face. There was a time I would have simply admired the moment, her stillness, her beauty, but now I couldn't shake the nagging sensation in my gut. Something was wrong. Emily had always been a little guarded with her phone, but this was different. She used to leave it lying on the kitchen counter while she cooked, or forget it in the bathroom after a shower. Lately, though, it never left her side. Even when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd tilt the screen away from me. I sat up, rubbing my hands over my face. "Morning," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Morning," she replied without turning around, still tapping away. "You're up early." "Yeah, couldn't sleep." Her tone was clipped, like the conversation was already over. She set the phone down on the windowsill and turned to face me. "You want coffee?" I was just about to put a pot on. I nodded, watching her slip out of the room. There wasn't anything specific to point to, no lipstick on the collar, no late-night calls to a strange number, but there was something about her lately. A distance, a wall. And then there was Kevin. My younger brother had always been the life of the party. He had that kind of effortless charm that let him get away with things most people couldn't. Growing up, it was always me covering for him, taking the blame when he dented Dad's car, helping him cram for a test he didn't bother to study for. But Kevin had been hanging around more than usual, stopping by unannounced, cracking jokes at my expense, and generally acting like our house was his second home. "Ryan, you coming?" Emily called from the kitchen. "Yeah." I shook off the lingering thoughts and pulled on a t-shirt. Downstairs, the smell of coffee filled the air. Emily was leaning against the counter, scrolling her phone again. She didn't even look up when I entered. "Anything good on there?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. She glanced at me briefly, her face unreadable. "Just checking emails." I let it drop, but my mind was already spinning. It wasn't just the phone. There were other things, the sudden late nights at work, the new perfume she'd started wearing, the way she seemed to bristle when I reached for her hand in public. And then there was last night. We'd hosted a family dinner, just the three of us and Kevin. Everything had been normal, or at least as normal as things had been lately, until I noticed it. A glance, a look between Emily and Kevin that lasted a beat too long. "Pass the potatoes," Emily had said, her voice light. Kevin handed them to her, their fingers brushing briefly. He grinned a little too wide, and she looked away quickly like a kid caught sneaking candy. It had been small, subtle enough that I wasn't sure I'd actually seen it. But now, sitting in the kitchen the next morning, the memory clawed at my brain like a splinter I couldn't remove. "I'm heading to the office for a bit," I said, grabbing my keys. Emily looked surprised. "On a Saturday?" "Yeah, just a few things to catch up on. Shouldn't take long." She nodded, turning back to her phone without a second thought. At the office, I couldn't focus. My inbox was full of unread emails, but I didn't open a single one. Instead, I found myself scrolling through Emily's Instagram, trying to read between the lines of her perfectly curated posts. There she was, smiling with a cocktail in hand during a girls' night out. There she was again, posing with Kevin at a family barbecue. Nothing incriminating, but the captions felt off. Too cheery. Too polished. It wasn't until I saw her latest post, a photo of our backyard, captioned "Home Sweet Home," that I realized how much time she'd spent with Kevin lately. There he was in the background, lounging in one of our patio chairs, looking perfectly at ease. I slammed the laptop shut and leaned back in my chair. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew. When I got home, Kevin's car was in the driveway. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside and heard the sound of laughter coming from the living room. "Ryan," Kevin called, grinning as he sprawled on the couch with a beer in hand. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Emily was sitting across from him, her legs curled up underneath her. She gave me a quick smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Kevin stopped by to help with the fence," she said. "The fence?" I repeated, glancing out the window. Sure enough, a pile of tools sat abandoned in the backyard. "Yeah," Kevin said. "Things been sagging for months. Thought I'd lend a hand." I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "How thoughtful of you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Kevin stayed for dinner, cracking jokes and acting like nothing was amiss. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept running through my mind. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out what. The next few days were a fog of routine, but my mind was anything but calm. Every interaction with Emily felt strained, every word laced with unspoken tension. At night, I'd lay beside her, the quiet hum of her breathing the only sound in the room, and wonder if I even knew the person lying next to me anymore. It was Wednesday evening when I found the first real clue. Emily had left for her yoga class, the one she'd recently started attending twice a week. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but the fact that she'd left in a fitted dress and heels instead of her usual leggings and tank top was hard to ignore. She said they were going for drinks afterward. I muttered to myself, replaying her excuse. I wandered aimlessly into the kitchen, intending to pour myself a drink, when I saw it. Her purse, forgotten on the counter in her rush out the door. I froze, my pulse quickening. I knew it was wrong, rifling through her things like this, but the urge to know outweighed the guilt. Slowly, I opened the clasp and peered inside. It was mostly the usual stuff: wallet, makeup bag, gum. But then my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar, a crumpled receipt. Pulling it out, I examined it closely. It was from a high-end restaurant downtown, dated last Thursday, a night she'd told me she was working late. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine. The pit in my stomach deepened. The next day, I decided to visit Kevin. Not at our house, where Emily might overhear, but at the bar he managed on the east side of town. It was early afternoon, before the dinner rush, and the place was mostly empty save for a few regulars nursing beers at the counter. "Ryan," Kevin called, wiping his hands on a towel as I walked in. "What brings you here?" "Just in the area," I lied, sliding onto a bar stool. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." Kevin grinned. "You mean you came for a free drink?" I forced a chuckle as he poured me a beer. We talked about nothing for a while: sports, work, the weather. But I couldn't shake the image of the receipt from my mind, and before I knew it, the words were spilling out. "Hey, were you with Emily last Thursday?" Kevin froze for a split second, so quick I almost missed it. He recovered with a laugh, shaking his head. "Nah, man. Why?" "She told me she was working late, but I found this receipt." I trailed off, watching him carefully. Kevin shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Maybe she went out with some friends. You know how women are about blowing off steam?" "Right," I said, though his answer only made my suspicion grow. That night, I decided to take things a step further. If I was going to find out the truth, I needed more than vague gut feelings and circumstantial evidence. While Emily showered, I rummaged through her closet and found her old laptop buried beneath a pile of sweaters. I hadn't seen her use it in years, but I remembered her mentioning that she'd synced her accounts across devices. Booting it up, I felt like a criminal. My hands trembled as I navigated through her email inbox, scanning for anything unusual. And then I found it: an email thread from Kevin, buried under promotional junk and newsletters. The subject line was innocuous: asterisk about Saturday asterisk, but the content made my blood run cold. "Can't stop thinking about last time. When can I see you again?" "Soon. We need to be careful. Ryan's starting to notice." I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding. There it was in black and white, proof that my wife and my brother were hiding something. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves. I installed a small camera in the living room, hidden among the bookshelves, and a voice recorder in the kitchen light fixture. I told myself it was the only way to get the truth, but a part of me hated the person I was becoming. On Friday night, the camera paid off. Emily had claimed she was going to bed early, but when I reviewed the footage the next morning, I saw Kevin slipping through the back door an hour later. They sat on the couch, their voices too low for the camera to pick up, but their body language was unmistakable. The way she leaned into him, the way his hand brushed her leg, it was all I needed to see. I shut the laptop, my hands shaking. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to think, to process what I'd seen. Instead, I acted as though nothing was wrong, going through the motions of our daily life with a hollow smile plastered across my face. But inside, I was a storm. By the time Sunday rolled around, I was ready to explode. Kevin had stopped by again, uninvited, and the sight of him lounging on my couch like he owned the place was enough to make my blood boil. "I'm going to grab some beers," I said, heading to the kitchen. Emily followed me, her voice light. "Want me to help?" "No, I've got it," I replied, barely managing to keep my tone steady. As soon as she was out of earshot, I grabbed the recorder from the light fixture and shoved it into my pocket. I didn't even care if she noticed it was missing. Later that night, when she was asleep, I listened to the audio. Kevin's voice, low and teasing. "You're really playing with fire. You know that?" Emily's laughter, soft and nervous. "Ryan doesn't suspect a thing." I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. They were wrong. Monday evening found me parked outside a dimly lit motel on the edge of town, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The audio from the recorder played on a loop in my head, each word twisting the knife deeper into my chest. "You're really playing with fire. Ryan doesn't suspect a thing." I'd followed Emily earlier, claiming I needed to work late while she said she was meeting a friend for dinner. It was a flimsy excuse, and I didn't buy it for a second. I'd trailed her from a distance, my heart pounding as she drove past the restaurant district and into the shadier part of town. Now I sat in the darkened car, watching as Kevin's Jeep pulled into the motel parking lot. He climbed out, glancing around like a thief before heading inside. Minutes later, Emily arrived, her face hidden beneath a hooded jacket. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my stomach twisting. This was it, irrefutable proof. My initial instinct was to storm inside, to confront them both in the middle of their sordid affair. But something stopped me. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed my phone and snapped a series of photos. Kevin's Jeep parked next to Emily's car, the motel sign glowing dimly in the background. My hands trembled as I documented every detail, knowing these images would be the nails in the coffin. Then I waited. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. My mind raced with scenarios, each one worse than the last. By the time they emerged, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. Kevin walked out first, his shirt untucked and his hair disheveled. Emily followed a few steps behind, her hood pulled low over her face. They didn't touch, didn't even look at each other, but the guilt was written all over them. I waited until they drove off in opposite directions before starting my car. Back at home, I paced the living room, the images and recordings spread out on the coffee table like pieces of a dark, twisted puzzle. The evidence was damning, more than enough to confront Emily or even take legal action if it came to that. But what would I say? How would I even begin? The front door creaked open, and Emily stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Hey," she said, dropping her keys on the counter. "You're home early." "Yeah," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face. "Is everything okay?" For a moment, I considered confronting her then and there, laying everything out in the open. But the words caught in my throat, replaced by a dull, simmering rage. "Fine," I said. "Just tired." She nodded, her gaze lingering for a moment before she disappeared upstairs. The next day, I paid a visit to Kevin's bar. It was early again, before the lunch crowd, and he was restocking bottles behind the counter. "Ryan," he said, flashing me his usual grin. "Twice in 1 week. People are going to start thinking you like me or something." I didn't laugh. "Cut the crap, Kevin," I said, my voice low and steady. He frowned, setting down the bottle he was holding. "What's this about?" "You know what it's about." His eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and shoved it in his face. The screen displayed one of the photos I'd taken the night before, Emily and Kevin's car side by side in the motel parking lot. The color drained from his face. "Ryan, don't even try to deny it," I snapped. "I've got pictures, recordings. I know everything." Kevin took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "Look, it's not what you think." "Don't insult me," I growled, cutting him off. "You've been sleeping with my wife." "My wife, Kevin. Do you have any idea what you've done?" He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Say something," I demanded, my voice rising. I screwed up. Okay, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. It just happened. You're my brother, I said, my voice breaking. How could you do this to me? Kevin looked away, his jaw clenched. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just, Emily and I. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't you dare try to justify this. The silence between us was deafening. You're going to end this, I said finally, my voice cold and firm. Tonight. And if you ever come near her again, I'll make sure you regret it. Kevin nodded, his face pale. Okay, I'll end it. I promise. But as I walked out of the bar, a bitter thought lingered in my mind. Could I trust him to keep his word? That evening, I confronted Emily. I didn't ease into it, didn't give her a chance to spin another lie. I laid the photos and recordings on the table and watched as her face went pale. Ryan, she started, her voice shaking. I can explain. Explain what? I snapped. Explain how you've been sneaking around with my brother? How you've lied to my face for God knows how long. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I never meant to hurt you, she said, her voice barely audible. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You've done a hell of a job. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung between us, suffocating and unbearable. What happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. I stared at her, my mind racing with possibilities. Divorce? Revenge? Walking away and never looking back? I don't know, I said finally. But whatever it is, you're not going to like it. By Tuesday morning, my anger had settled into something colder, sharper, a quiet resolve. I didn't want Emily's excuses, and I didn't need Kevin's half-baked apologies. What I needed was control, a way to untangle myself from their betrayal while making them both feel the weight of what they'd done. I sat in my car outside Kevin's bar, the engine idling as I rehearsed my plan. Confronting them individually had been like sparring with shadows, slippery and unsatisfying. This time, I was bringing them both into the light. That evening, I invited Kevin over for dinner. You sure? He asked over the phone, his voice cautious. Things were a little tense last time. Yeah, I'm sure, I said, forcing a note of calm into my voice. Emily and I talked. We need to clear the air. There was a long pause before he answered. All right. What time? 7. After hanging up, I called Emily at work. Hey, Kevin's coming over tonight, I said, cutting off her greeting. What? Why? Because I said so, I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. Be home by 6. I hung up before she could respond. The table was set, candles lit, wine poured. I'd even cooked a roast chicken with rosemary, one of Emily's favorites. She arrived home first, her expression wary as she stepped through the door. What's going on? She asked, setting her purse down. We're having dinner, I said evenly. With Kevin? Yes. Her eyes flicked to the dining table, then back to me. Ryan, I don't think. Don't worry, I said, cutting her off. You won't have to think. Just eat. Kevin arrived a few minutes later, looking as uneasy as Emily. He hesitated in the doorway, his gaze darting between us like he was walking into an ambush. Come on in, I said, my voice unervingly cheerful. Dinner's ready. The first 15 minutes passed in tense silence. Kevin poked at his food. Emily barely touched hers, and I kept the conversation limited to meaningless pleasantries. So, how's the bars? I asked Kevin, slicing into my chicken. Good, he replied, avoiding my eyes. Business picking up? Yeah, a little. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her fork scraping against her plate. I set my knife down and leaned back in my chair, swirling the wine in my glass. You know, it's funny. I've been thinking a lot about family lately. Kevin froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Family's supposed to be there for you, I continued, my tone calm and measured. They're supposed to have your back, no matter what. Isn't that right? Emily's eyes darted to Kevin, then back to me. Ryan, what are you? Shut up, I snapped, my voice like a whip. She recoiled, her face pale. Kevin set his fork down, his jaw tightening. What's this about? He asked, his voice low. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, laying it on the table between us. With a few taps, I brought up the photos of their cars parked at the motel. Then I pressed play on the audio recording, Kevin's voice echoing through the room. You're really playing with fire. You know that? Emily's laughter followed, light and nervous. Ryan doesn't suspect a thing. The color drained from both their faces. Explain this, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Emily covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Kevin looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Ryan, Emily started, her voice trembling. I can. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to explain this away. Look, Kevin said, raising his hands. I messed up, okay? But it's not. Not what? I barked, slamming my hand on the table. Not what it looks like. Because it looks like my wife and my brother have been sneaking around behind my back. Emily burst into tears, her sobs muffled by her hands. Kevin just sat there, his head bowed like a guilty child. I trusted you, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Both of you. And this is how you repay me? There was a long, heavy silence. I'm sorry, Emily whispered finally. I laughed bitterly. Sorry? You're sorry? That's all you've got. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. It was a mistake. I never meant for it to happen. Don't, I said, my voice cold. Just don't. Kevin cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. Ryan, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I turned to him, my eyes blazing. You can start by getting the hell out of my house. He stood up, his movements stiff and mechanical. Okay, I'll go. As he walked to the door, I called after him, my voice dripping with venom. You're dead to me, Kevin. Don't ever come near me again. He paused for a moment, his shoulders slumping, before stepping outside and closing the door behind him. I turned back to Emily, who was still sobbing at the table. You have 1 week to pack your things and get out, I said, my voice flat. Ryan, please. 1 week, I repeated, and then I never want to see you again. That night, I sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in my hand. The house was silent, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air like a storm that had passed but left destruction in its wake. I stared at the empty glass, my mind racing with thoughts of what came next. Divorce? Revenge? Starting over? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was certain. The life I'd built was gone, shattered beyond repair. The days after the confrontation passed in a surreal haze. Emily moved through the house like a ghost, her presence both familiar and unbearable. Every step she took, every glance in my direction, was a reminder of what she'd done, and what I couldn't forgive. True to my word, I gave her a week. 7 days to pack her things and figure out where she'd go. 7 days to untangle our lives, to decide what fragments of our marriage she wanted to take with her. But I wasn't idle during that time. While Emily stuffed her belongings into suitcases, I was busy building my case. I compiled the photos, the audio recordings, the texts I'd extracted from her laptop. I contacted my lawyer, laying out the evidence of her affair and preparing the groundwork for a divorce. And then, I turned my attention to Kevin. On the 5th day, I walked into Kevin's bar just as he was unlocking the doors for the evening shift. His face fell the moment he saw me, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. We need to talk, I said, pushing past him and into the empty bar. Ryan, Save it, I snapped, spinning to face him. You've said enough. He shut the door, his shoulders slumping in defeat. What do you want? I want you to understand what you've done, I said, my voice cold and deliberate. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed our family. You ruined everything. He flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry isn't good enough, I said, stepping closer. You think you can just say sorry and we'll go back to normal? You think I'll ever trust you again? He didn't answer. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to quit this job. You're going to leave town. And you're never going to come near me or Emily again. Kevin's head shot up, his eyes wide. Leave town? Ryan, come on. You owe me that much, I said, cutting him off. If you have even a shred of decency left, you'll do it. For once in your life, you'll take responsibility for your actions. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw clenched, before nodding. Okay, he said quietly. I'll go. Good, I said, turning to leave. And if I ever see you again, it won't end with words. By the time Emily's deadline arrived, The house felt like a battlefield. She had packed most of her things into boxes, but the spaces they left behind were glaring. Empty shelves, bare walls, an echo in the rooms that hadn't been there before. As she loaded the last of her boxes into her car, she turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Ryan, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I can't fix this, but I never stopped loving you. Please believe that." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she climbed into the car and drove away. For the first time in years, the house was mine and mine alone. The silence was deafening, but it was also a relief. I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. But even as I tried to move on, the bitterness lingered. It wasn't enough to cut them out of my life. I needed closure. I needed to make sure they couldn't hurt me again. Over the next few weeks, I quietly dismantled the last remnants of their connection to me. I sold the house, moving to a smaller place on the other side of town. I deleted their numbers from my phone, blocked them on social media, and told mutual friends not to mention their names around me. And then I went one step further. Using the evidence I'd gathered, I anonymously sent a tip to Kevin's boss about his extracurricular activities with married women. It didn't take long for the news to spread, and soon Kevin was out of a job, his reputation in ruins. As for Emily, I filed for divorce, citing infidelity. The settlement was harsh. She got nothing but her own belongings, while I kept the house, the car, and everything else we'd built together. By the time the dust settled, I was free. Or so I thought. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, I received a text from an unknown number. "Unknown, I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay." It didn't take long to figure out who it was. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond, to ask her why she was reaching out after all this time. But another part of me knew it didn't matter. I deleted the message and blocked the number, leaving the past where it belonged. As I sat there in the quiet of my new home, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The wounds were still there, raw and aching, but I was learning to live with them. Maybe I'd never get the answers I wanted. Maybe I didn't need them, because in the end, I wasn't the one who lost everything. They were. The spring sun filtered through the blinds of my new apartment, painting streaks of light across the hardwood floor. It had been 6 months since Emily and Kevin had exited my life. The silence of my space was deafening at times, but it was better than living in the shadows of their betrayal. The legal battles were over. I'd sold the house, finalized the divorce, and cut all ties. I thought I'd feel free, but what I mostly felt was empty. One evening, while sitting in a dimly lit bar, I met Natalie. She was confident, sharp-witted, and refreshingly honest. She leaned into our conversation with a directness that caught me off guard, but didn't let me retreat into my own head. "You've been through hell," she said after I told her the barest version of my story. "But hell isn't where you stay. It's what you walk through." Her words stuck with me. Over time, Natalie and I grew closer. She was patient with my hesitation, but she didn't coddle me either. "I'm not Emily," she said one evening, her eyes piercing. "Don't punish me for her mistakes." Her words made me realize how much I'd been holding back, afraid to trust again. Months later, I stood in front of a small house on the edge of town. A fresh start. Natalie stood beside me, her hand slipping into mine as we gazed at the place. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. "Hope." "I'm ready,"